Hi all. Here today we'll be discussing Neoclassical period. The Neoclassical period starts from 1660 to 1785. See in the entry of Neoclassic and Romantic. So talking about Neoclassical period comprises of Restoration period, Augustan age and age of Johnson. So these three periods together comprises Neoclassical period. Now let us see one by one. First of all, Restoration period. This period takes its name from the restoration of the Stuart line to the English throne in 1660 at the end of the Commonwealth. It is specified as lasting until 1700. The urbanity, wit, etc. of the life centering on the court in sharp contrast to the seriousness and sobriety of the earlier Puritan regime is reflected in much of the literature of this age. The theatres came back to vigorous life after the revocation of the ban placed on them by the Puritans in 1642, although they become more exclusively oriented toward the aristocratic classes than they had been earlier. Sir George Etheridge, William Wycherley, William Congreve, and John Dryden developed the distinctive comedy of manners called Restoration comedy, and Dryden, Thomas Ordway, and other playwrights developed the distinctive form of tragedy called heroic drama. Dryden was the major poet and critic as well as one of the major dramatists. Other poets were the satirist Samuel Butler and the Earl of Rochester, notable writers in prose. In addition to the masterly Dryden were Samuel Pepys, Sir William Temple, and religious writer in vernacular English John Bunyan and philosopher John Locke. Afra Ben, the first English woman to earn her living by her pen and one of the most inventive and versatile authors of the age, wrote poems, highly successful plays, and Orinoco, the tragic story of a noble African slave, an important precursor of the novel. Now moving on to Augustan age. The original Augustan age was the brilliant literary period of Virgil, Horace, and Ovid under the Roman Emperor Augustus. In the 18th century and later, however, the term was frequently applied also to the literary period in England from approximately 1700 to 1745. The leading writers of the time, such as Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, and Joseph Addison, themselves drew the parallel to the Roman Augustans and deliberately imitated their literary forms and subjects, their emphasis on social concerns, and their ideals of moderation, decorum, and urbanity. A major representative of popular rather than classical writing in this period was the novelist, journalist, and pamphleteer Daniel Defoe. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu was a brilliant letter writer in a great era of letter writing. She also wrote poems of wit and candour that violated the conventional moral and intellectual roles assigned to women in Augustan era. Now moving on to the next age, that is age of Johnson, or it is called as Enlightenment age. Age of Johnson is also called as Enlightenment age. This period between the death of Alexander Pope in 1744 and 1785, which was 1 year after the death of Samuel Johnson and 1 year before Robert Burns' poems chiefly in Scottish dialect. An older name for his half century, the Age of Johnson or Age of Sensibility, stresses the dominant position of Samuel Johnson and his literary and intellectual circle, which included Oliver Goldsmith, Edmund Burke, James Boswell, Edward Gilbert, and Hester Lynch Raleigh. These authors, on the whole, represented a culmination of the literary and critical modes of Neoclassicism and the world view of the Enlightenment. The more recent name, Age of Sensibility, puts its stress on the emergence in other writers of the 1740s and later of the new cultural attitudes, theories of literature, and types of poetry we find in this period. For example, a growing sympathy for Middle Ages, a wave of cultural primitivism, an awakening interest in ballads and other folk literature, a turn from neoclassic correctness and its emphasis on judgment and restraint to an emphasis on instinct and feeling, the development of a literature of sensibility, and above all, exaltation by some critics of original genius and a bardic poetry of the sublime and visionary imagination. Thomas Gray expressed this anti-neoclassic sensibility and a set of values in his stanzas to Mr. Bentley. The other poets who showed similar shifts in thought and taste were William Collins and Joseph, then Thomas Warton, Christopher Smart, William Cooper, etc. Thomas Percy published his influential Relics of Ancient English Poetry, which is published in 1765, which included many folk ballads and a few medieval metrical romances. And James Macpherson in the same decade published his greatly altered versions of the poems of the Gaelic bard Ossian, which were enormously popular throughout Europe. This was also the period of great novelists, some realistic and satiric and some sentimental, Samuel Richardson, Henry Fielding, Tobias Somlet, and Lawrence Sterne, etc.